Hello dear children, hope you all are safe and fine and very eager to study today's lesson. Today we shall study lesson 9 of science, that is Heredity and Evolution for class 10th. But before we begin with the lesson, let us give a quick review to whatever we already know about this lesson. I think children, you all know that who were the ancestors of the modern humans. And children, you will also be able to answer some simple questions like, are all humans alike and do they all have common ancestors? Dear children, now let us see what new we are going to learn today in this lesson. Today we will learn about Mendel's contributions and rules for inheritance of traits. Then we will study about sex determination. Next, we will discuss about evolution. And in the topic of evolution, we will study natural selection, genetic drift and speciation. Then we will talk about evolution and classification. Origin of life. Tracing evolutionary relationships. Fossils. How do we know how old fossils are? Then children, we will talk about stages of evolution. And towards the end of the lesson, we will discuss about molecular phylogeny. Inheritance of traits. Children, we all know that a child bears all the basic features of a human being. However, it does not look exactly like its parents. The biggest question which arises here is that which traits will appear in the child? Will they be its father's or will they be of its mother's? For every trait, there are two versions in every child, and the rules for inheritance of such traits in human beings is that both the father and the mother contribute practically equal amounts of genetic material to the child. This means that each trait can be influenced by both paternal and maternal DNA. To understand all this, let us study the experiments and contribution of Sir Gregor Johann Mendel in this field. Mendel, in his monastery, started growing peas and experimented on them. This helped him to arrive at the laws of inheritance. Prior to him, many other scientists also studied this, the inheritance in peas and other organisms. But Mendel blended his knowledge of science and mathematics and gave excellent results which we study as laws of inheritance today. Mendel used a variety of different kinds of peas with contrasting visible characters in his experiments. In his first experiment, he took pea plants with a different characteristic, a tall pea plant and a short pea plant. And on cross-fertilization of these two types, he found that in the first generation or the F1 progeny, all the plants were tall. No medium height plants were reported. This means that in F1 generation, only one of the parental traits was seen and not the mixture of the two parental traits. Then Mendel experimented on F1 generation plants, which were all tall. He took these F1 generation plants and self-pollinated them, and then studied the plants of F2 generation. He found that all the plants in the second generation or the F2 progeny were not tall. In F2 generation, 3/4 of them were tall and 1/4 of them was short, or in other words, the ratio of the tall and short plants was 3:1. This indicates that 2 copies of every trait are inherited in each sexually reproducing organism. These two may be identical or may be different. If both the copies are different, then one of them, which is the dominant trait, is represented by a capital letter, that is capital T in this case, and the other, which is a recessive trait, is represented by a small letter, that is small t in this case. Both the genes for height in pea plants, which are tall, are for tallness and are represented as capital TT, while both the genes for height in pea plants, which are short, are for shortness and are represented by small tt. But on crossbreeding these two types of plants, all tall plants were obtained. Such a type of crossing is termed as monohybrid cross, because in this only one trait is studied, which is height of the plant. In this cross, no short plants were obtained, or you can say that the ratio of tall plants to short plants was 4:0. But children, are these results not surprisingly different to what we normally expect? So Mendel further carried out his experiments and selected 2 tall plants from those which he obtained after the crossbreeding in F1 generation. He then carried out their self-fertilization. Though these plants were tall, they had genes both for tallness as well as for shortness. Now, the results of his experiment further surprised him, as he obtained 3 tall plants and 1 short plant in this experiment with the ratio 3:1. In this cross, only one plant had genes with both small t, due to which that plant was short. Rest all the 3 plants were tall. Whether both the genes in them were capital TT or one capital and one small t. So this proved that a single copy of capital T is enough to make a plant tall. But for a plant to be short, it is necessary that both the genes should be small t. After this, to further continue his experiments and discoveries, he selected 2 traits, this time shape and color. He took 2 plants with 2 different characters. The seeds of one plant were round and green, and the seeds of the other were wrinkled and yellow. 2 sets of genes were made, capital RR, small yy, and small rr, capital YY. Then their crossbreeding was carried out. The F1 generation progeny were all found to be round and yellow, with the genes capital R, small r, and capital Y, small y. Then their self-fertilization was carried out for F2 generation. Now, 4 gene sets were formed. They were capital R, capital Y, capital R, small y, small r, capital Y, and small r, small y. Children, the results he received were that out of the total 556 seeds he studied, 315 were found to be round and yellow, and 108 were found to be round and green. They were in the ratio 9:3. Next, 101 were found to be wrinkled and yellow, and 32 were found to be wrinkled and green. They were in the ratio 3:1. Children, let us now see how do these traits inherit themselves. Cellular DNA is the information source for making proteins in the cell. A section of DNA that provides information for one protein is called the gene for that protein. Proteins in the body are formed according to these genes only. Let us take the example of tallness as a characteristic. Plant height depends on the amount of a particular plant hormone that can trigger the growth, and the amount of plant hormone made will depend on the efficiency of the process of making it. Consider now an enzyme that is important for this process. If it works efficiently, a lot of hormone will be made and the plants will be tall. But if the genes for this enzyme has an alteration, that will make the enzyme less efficient and less amount of hormone will be produced. This will make the plant short. Thus, we conclude that genes control the characteristics or the traits. Now, one important thing to note is that during sexual reproduction, both the parents contribute equally to the DNA of the progeny. In every cell, there are 2 genes for every trait, one inherited from male parent and the other from the female. However, in germ cells, there is a single set of genes. Children, the next topic of our discussion is sex determination. In the nucleus of the cell, of all the human beings, 23 pairs of chromosomes are formed. One pair out of these, called the sex chromosomes, is odd in not always being a perfect pair. Women have a perfect pair of sex chromosomes, both called X, but men have one X and one Y chromosome. An unfertilized egg always has a X chromosome in it. When a X chromosome bearing sperm cells fuses with this egg cell, then the zygote will have 2 X chromosomes and will develop into a girl child. But when Y chromosome bearing sperm cell fuses this egg cell, then the zygote will have 1 X and 1 Y chromosome and will develop into a male child. Let us now try to understand what is evolution. Children, in some organisms, there is an inbuilt tendency to variations generation after generation due to the changes in the DNA and or as a result of sexual reproduction. All this brings about a gradual change in all these living organisms from the pre-existing ones. So, this naturally occurring, slow, continuous and irreversible process of change is called evolution. New organisms and new species originate because of evolution. Let us understand this with the help of one example. In the picture shown here, there is a group of 11 red beetles and there is one green beetle among them. The crow shown in the picture can feed upon these beetles. Now let us assume that these beetles live in bushes with green leaves. Red beetles can be easily located by the crow in the green leaves. So, the crow eats the red beetles. But due to the green color of the leaves on the bushes, the green beetle is not seen by the crow, and therefore the crow does not eat this green colored beetle. Now, what do you see in the second picture? Yes, the number of green beetles has increased, while that of red beetles has started decreasing. Or in other words, you can say that the progeny of green beetles is not eaten by the crow, so their number is increasing, while the progeny of red beetles continues to be eaten by the crow, so their number in the beetle population is decreasing. You can see this in the third picture. Now, with the passage of time, all the beetles in the group left were green beetles. Children, do you know that we call such a phenomena as natural selection? In this example, the coming generation of beetles will be all now green in color. Natural selection directs evolution in the beetle population. It results in adaptations in the beetle population to fit their environment better. In a second situation, again, a color variation arises during reproduction, but now it results in the production of beetle that is blue in color instead of red beetles, with one beetle that is blue in color. In this situation, the color of the beetle does not matter, because whether it is red or blue, both can be seen by the crow in the green leaves of the bushes, and therefore the crow can eat the red as well as the blue beetles. Now look at the second picture carefully. In this, an elephant comes by and stamps on the bushes where the beetles live. By chance, this kills most of the red beetles, and the few beetles that survived are mostly blue. The beetle population slowly expands again, but now they are mostly blue beetles, and this you can see in the third picture. Children, did you notice one thing over here? In this situation, the color change gave no survival advantage to the beetles. Instead, it was simply a matter of accidental survival of beetles of one color. This changed the common characteristic of the resultant population by changing the frequency of some genes in the population. This is termed as genetic drift. Now consider a third situation. In this, at some time, as the beetle population began to expand, the bushes started suffering from a plant disease. Consequently, the amount of leaf material available for the beetles reduced. The beetles were now poorly nourished, due to which the average weight of adult beetles started decreasing. But in this case, no genetic change was seen. And after a few years, it was noticed that when the plant disease eliminated, there was once again sufficient food, and the beetles once again became healthy and well nourished. Children, this is not an example of evolution, because in this situation, no change in genes has taken place. This may be simply termed as a situation of starvation. Now consider another example which explains that how an individual cannot pass on to its progeny the experiences of its lifetime. If the tails of a group of mice are removed generation after generation for many years, it does not mean that these tailless mice will produce tailless progeny. They will still produce progenies which have tails. This is because removal of the tail does not change the genes of the germ cells of the mice. Children, next we will discuss about speciation. A group of living organisms capable of interbreeding is called species. Two populations that cannot reproduce with each other are termed as two independent species. Interbreeding cannot take place among two independent species. Now let us try to understand what is speciation with the help of another situation. In this, beetles feed on the bushes all around them, and these bushes may be widely spread over a mountain. As a result, the beetle population becomes very large. But some beetles who do not prefer to travel far feed mostly on a few nearby bushes throughout their lifetime. So, in this huge population of beetles, there will be a subpopulation in the neighborhoods. Most reproduction will be within these subpopulations, but occasionally some adventurous beetles might go from one side to another. These migrant beetles will reproduce with the local population. This will result in the genes of the migrant beetle entering a new population. This kind of gene flow is bound to happen between populations that are partly but not completely separated. If, however, between two such subpopulations, a large river comes into existence, the two populations will be further isolated, and the level of gene flow between them will decrease even further. Over generations, genetic drift will accumulate different changes in each subpopulation. Natural selection may also operate differently in these subpopulations. Together, the process of genetic drift and natural selection will result in these two isolated subpopulation of beetles becoming more and more different from each other. Eventually, the members of these two groups will become incapable of reproducing with each other. This will result in generation of new species. That's all for today, children. Hope this session was helpful for all of you. We will soon meet again with the second part of this video, in which we will discuss all the remaining topics of this lesson. Till then, children, you take good care of yourselves and try to give a thorough reading to all the topics that we have covered today from your textbooks. Thank you.